On June 24th, 2009, Michael Jackson walked onto a rehearsal stage, preparing for the biggest comeback of his life. He sang, he moved, he gave instructions, and for a moment it looked like the king of pop was finally ready to return. But no one inside that room knew one terrifying truth. This would be the last time Michael Jackson would ever rehearse. Less than 24 hours later, he would be inside a Los Angeles mansion, unable to wake up, while doctors and paramedics fought to save his life. Today, we are going to explain the final 24 hours of Michael Jackson, the pressure behind his comeback, the sleepless night that changed everything, and the tragic decisions that turned his final rehearsal into a final goodbye. For the world, Michael Jackson was not just a singer. He was a symbol. He was the artist who changed pop music, changed music videos, changed live performance, and became one of the most recognized entertainers in history. But by June 2009, the man behind the legend was carrying a weight most people could never see. He was preparing for This Is It, a massive comeback concert series planned for London. Millions of fans were waiting. The media was watching every detail. The music industry wanted to know whether Michael could still do what he had done for decades. For Michael, this was more than a tour. It was a chance to return, a chance to remind the world who he was, a chance to rebuild the image that years of controversy, rumors, and public pressure had damaged. But the pressure around him was enormous. Every rehearsal mattered. Every movement was watched. Every note, every step, every costume, every stage effect had to feel perfect. When the world calls someone the king of pop, it does not allow him to be ordinary. And that is where the final day begins. On June 24th, Michael arrived at the Staples Center in Los Angeles for rehearsal. The stage was filled with dancers, musicians, crew members, lights, cameras, and the energy of a major production moving toward opening night. This was not a normal rehearsal. This was the rehearsal for a comeback the entire world was waiting to see. Michael moved through the show with focus. He listened to the music. He corrected details. He gave instructions to the people around him. He was not simply standing there as a celebrity. He was acting like the artist he had always been, carefully shaping every part of the performance. People who saw him during those final rehearsal moments later described him as engaged and present. The music was playing. The dancers were moving. The stage lights were shining, and for a short time it looked like the comeback was real. The same man who had once made the moonwalk immortal was back under the lights again. But the stage only showed one side of the story. Behind the performance, Michael was reportedly struggling with serious insomnia. Sleep had become one of the biggest problems in his life. His body was tired, but rest would not come easily. His mind was under pressure, his schedule was demanding, and the expectations placed on him were almost impossible. Fame can look beautiful from the outside, but inside it can become a cage. People wanted Michael to return as the same unstoppable performer they remembered. They wanted the magic, they wanted the dancing, they wanted the voice, they wanted the legend. But legends are still human, and Michael Jackson was exhausted. After the rehearsal ended, Michael left the Staples Center and returned to the rented mansion where he had been staying in Holmby Hills, Los Angeles. From the outside, the house looked calm and private. But inside that mansion, the final hours of Michael Jackson's life were about to begin. The problem was still the same. He needed sleep. His personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, was with him that night. Murray had been hired to care for Michael during preparations for the tour, but the medical decisions made inside that bedroom would later become the center of investigation, court testimony, and public debate. According to the case that followed, several medications were involved during Michael's final night. The most important and controversial one was propofol. Propofol is not a normal sleeping pill. It is a powerful anesthetic, usually used in medical settings with proper monitoring, trained staff, and emergency equipment. In a hospital, it is treated with serious care because it can deeply sedate a person and affect breathing. But Michael was not in a hospital. He was in a bedroom. That detail changed everything. As the night moved into the early hours of June 25th, Michael still could not sleep properly. The pressure to help him rest continued. The minutes passed. The room remained private. The world outside had no idea what was happening. And slowly, the final night became a dangerous timeline. A timeline of exhaustion, a timeline of medication, a timeline of decisions that would later be questioned in court. In stories like this, people often look for one secret moment, one hidden tape, or one shocking sentence that explains everything. But sometimes tragedy is not created by one dramatic event. Sometimes tragedy is created quietly, through pressure, through routine, through dangerous choices that seem normal until they become irreversible. That is what makes Michael Jackson's final hours so haunting. He was not surrounded by screaming fans. He was not on a stage. He was not in front of cameras. He was in a room, trying to sleep. At some point that morning, everything changed. Michael Jackson became unresponsive. The man whose music had filled stadiums around the world was suddenly not waking up. In that moment, fame meant nothing. Record sales meant nothing. Awards meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was whether someone could bring him back. Dr. Murray later said he found Michael not breathing properly and unresponsive. What happened next became one of the most controversial parts of the case. Prosecutors later argued that Murray failed to properly monitor Michael and did not respond the way a doctor should have responded during a medical emergency. The delay before the emergency call became one of the biggest questions surrounding the final hours. At 12:21 p.m., a 911 call was finally placed. The caller told emergency services that a man was not breathing and needed help. The call did not immediately identify the patient as Michael Jackson to the public. But inside the mansion, the emergency was already serious. Paramedics arrived and began trying to revive him. They performed emergency procedures and worked to bring back a pulse. But the situation was critical. The same house that had looked peaceful from the outside was now filled with panic, urgency, and the desperate sound of people trying to save a life. Michael was transported to Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center. Doctors continued working on him. For a short time, the public only heard confusing reports. Something had happened to Michael Jackson. He had been rushed to a hospital. Nobody knew exactly how serious it was. Fans began searching for updates. Newsrooms started chasing information. The world was still catching up to what had already happened inside that mansion. Then the news became impossible to ignore. At 2:26 p.m. on June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson was pronounced dead. He was only 50 years old. The shock traveled across the world within minutes. For many fans, it felt unreal. Michael Jackson was not just a celebrity headline. He was part of their childhood, their music, their memories, and their culture. His songs had played in homes, cars, parties, weddings, television shows, and stadiums across generations. People gathered outside the hospital. Others went to his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Around the world, fans played his music not to dance, but to grieve. The king of pop was gone. But after the grief came the questions. What exactly happened inside that mansion? Why was such a powerful anesthetic involved? Why was Michael unable to sleep? Why was a drug usually used in medical settings being used in a private home? And who was responsible for the final decisions made that morning? The official medical findings later stated that Michael Jackson died from acute propofol intoxication, with other sedatives also involved. His death was ruled a homicide. That word shocked people, but it did not mean a planned murder in the way some people imagine from crime stories. In this case, it meant another person's actions contributed to the death. The investigation turned toward Dr. Conrad Murray. Murray was charged with involuntary manslaughter. His trial became one of the most watched celebrity cases of the decade because it opened the door to Michael's private final hours. During the trial, prosecutors argued that Murray acted with serious negligence. They said he used propofol in a home setting, failed to use proper monitoring, and failed to respond correctly when Michael became unresponsive. The defense argued that Michael may have taken additional medication himself while Murray was away. But the jury did not accept that argument as enough to clear him. In November 2011, Dr. Conrad Murray was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. He was later sentenced to 4 years in jail. For the legal system, that verdict gave an answer, but for millions of fans, the emotional question remained. How could one of the most famous people on earth be so vulnerable in his final hours? That is the part of the story that still hurts. Because when we look at the last 24 hours, the contrast is painful. In one moment, Michael was standing on a rehearsal stage preparing for a huge comeback. Only hours later, he was in a bedroom, unable to wake up. The world was waiting for him to return, but Michael was running out of time. There is something deeply haunting about the final rehearsal footage. When people watch those moments from "This Is It," they are not just watching a superstar practice. They are watching the final public image of an artist who did not know it was almost over. He was still correcting musical details, still moving with rhythm, still trying to make the show perfect, still trying to be Michael Jackson. And that is the tragedy. The world wanted the legend, but the man behind the legend was exhausted. Michael's death also forced people to talk about the darker side of celebrity life. It raised questions about private doctors, prescription drugs, performance pressure, and the way famous people can become isolated even when surrounded by staff, managers, assistants, and security. Sometimes fame does not protect a person. Sometimes fame makes it harder for people to say no, harder to slow down, harder to admit weakness, harder to be treated like an ordinary human being. Michael Jackson had spent most of his life in the public eye. As a child, he was already performing. As an adult, he became a global icon. His face, his voice, and his dance moves became known across countries and generations. But in his final hours, he needed something very simple. Rest, peace, protection, and time. He did not get enough of any of them. The saddest part is that Michael died while preparing for a comeback that was supposed to bring him back to the world. The fans were waiting. The stage was ready. The dancers were ready. The music was ready. Everything was prepared for his return, except Michael himself. After his death, This Is It became more than a concert project. It became a symbol of what almost happened, a reminder of the show that was never performed, the comeback that never arrived, and the final version of Michael that fans would ever see. His music returned to charts. His videos were watched again. People replayed old performances and remembered the artist who had changed entertainment forever. But the mystery of his final hours remained because the details were so painful. A man known for movement died in stillness. A man known for sound left behind silence. A man known for making the world look at him spent his final moments away from the world. That is why people still talk about June 25th, 2009. Not only because Michael Jackson died, but because of how close he seemed to a new beginning. His last 24 hours began with rehearsal, hope, and preparation. They ended with sirens, hospital lights, breaking news, and a wave of grief that moved across the entire world. The official story has been told through medical reports, court testimony, and legal judgment, but the emotional story is larger than the documents. It is the story of a performer who gave his life to the stage, a father whose children lost him suddenly, an artist who was trying to return, a man who needed sleep but found danger instead. Michael Jackson's final day reminds us that fame can hide suffering. It reminds us that applause can cover exhaustion, and it reminds us that even the brightest spotlight cannot show what is happening behind closed doors. To the world, he was the king of pop. But in those final hours, he was simply Michael, a man carrying pressure, a man searching for sleep, a man preparing for one last comeback. And a legend who walked off the rehearsal stage without knowing it would be the final time. That is the real story of the last 24 hours of Michael Jackson.